Okay, so this is going to be about InnerSource at Bosch. We've been doing this since 2009, even though at the time we didn't know it was called InnerSource. And we learned a few things along the way, and those I will share today. A couple of words about me. Actually, I really like this format. Do you know the introduction with hashtags? It's really quick. You go around and everyone asks 3 hashtags. So my hashtags are aging nerd, open source, my first project, recumbent cycling, and astrophotography. That's me. And about my company. Question, who knows Bosch here in the room? Okay. So then you know that we were once a startup founded in a garage in 1886 actually, so we're pretty old. And our killer app at the time was the Bosch Magneto. That's what we built. It's basically the system that provides the current for spark plugs in combustion engines. At the time, it was still cool to display the exhaust here, and not so much anymore. Yeah, that's what we do today. We've diversified somewhat, and we're also friggin' big, I would say. Yes, I'm back again. So lots of people working all around the world, and also lots of people developing software. Mostly embedded software, but the percentage of real IT software is growing every day. So why did we do InnerSource in 2009? So the reason is this basically. So we're massively distributed across the globe, 120 research locations. And the problem that we face is this basically. Collaboration is really hard, especially if you do it across organizational units. That's more difficult than if you're across locations often. And then you also have to do it in different time zones. So that's the challenge basically that we try to solve with applying InnerSource. And the most difficult thing in this setting is not so much developing software, but rather sharing the knowledge under these rather difficult circumstances. Asynchronous, distributed, the most difficult case. And for us it's the most common case as well, as is for many other companies, I guess. So that's the challenge. And there's research on this. I think it's maybe a bit outdated by now. It's from 2001. It says, as soon as you start distributing the development of your software projects, even across buildings on the same campus, you can roughly double the cost, if you're doing it right. If you're not doing it right, then it's way more expensive. And this is basically the number that got the whole thing started, I think. So then we looked around, what can we do to make collaboration more efficient, basically? And then we looked at various things at the time, wikis, forums, all that stuff that we now take for granted. And we also look at open source, because they have the very same challenge, massively distributed, people often not even know each other, and still they manage to collaborate and put out good software. Today we know it's called InnerSource. As I mentioned, we didn't know the term at the beginning, so we call it something different. We called it Bosch Internal Open Source, a bit oxymoronic. But it has such a nice abbreviation that's worth everything, I think. So we called it BIOS, Bosch Internal Open Source. And I'm not going to tell you the story of what it looked like with us. We started in 2009 as an experiment, actually. It was not like something rolled out to the whole company. It was rather restricted at the time. In 2013, the successes actually warranted an extension. And in 2016, we're basically now rolling this out within the whole company. So let's start with the first phase, the experiment. So that ran from 2009 to 2012. And the way this works is that we basically established a bubble within the organization where it could work completely different from what was otherwise common at Bosch. And we call this the biosphere. See how that acronym comes in? Wonderful. And what this means for us, biosphere, and working differently, we usually summarize with these 5 values. Now, that's a different summary than you had, Enrique. Where's Enrique? Anyway, hello. So we say working in this bubble means, first of all, openness in the sense of making it inclusive, making it easy for people to join in projects, usually not something that you see in traditional software development. Transparency, obviously, sharing work results, sharing communication, or making it rather public. Decision making is public. Everything was voluntary. Can you imagine that? Like working in the company and working voluntary? It's unheard of, usually. Also self-determination, so we got to decide what processes, what tools, what technologies. Basically, we got to decide everything, and no one told us what to do. And finally, meritocracy. So rather than the guys sitting highest up in the org chart having the say, those who actually do have the say. That's what we wanted to do. That's what we did in the bubble. And if you imagine what this was like usually in the company, we were trying to go this way, and the mainstream was the opposite. So it was On the one hand, awesome. On the other hand, also a bit scary. So we knew going in that we had to protect this bubble because otherwise it would burst within a couple of months with the friction that we were going to expect. So we built sort of a protective layer around it, consisting of two things. The first one is what we call review committee. It's actually a pattern now. It was basically a way to give managers some level of influence of what was going in the bubble without allowing them to micromanage the whole thing. So it's, that's what we call review committee. What these guys would do is they would convene twice a year, and one of these meetings they would decide who was going to be allowed to work in the community. Not so much who in person, but rather which projects or communities would be started. And there were some criteria which we defined for that, which are, I guess, not very relevant today. And they also had the right to sunset communities if they felt it was no longer working well. And that was basically the task of the review committee. And that basically kept management influence at a minimum, which is nice. Oh, is this going to be recorded? Damn. Okay, and the second part is facilitation. There was actually one guy who did nothing else than making sure that the people working in the biosphere could work without friction. So he was responsible for setting ground rules, the one we've seen before, licensing, dealing with legal, all that kind of stuff. And we also had a little budget of 1.5 million a year roughly, which we spent on hardware. Anyway, we spent that on hardware also to get it much faster, sometimes only in days, and usually when you use procurement in a big company it can take weeks, months sometimes until something shows up. And we also used the money to get people on board. And there were two ways we did this basically. So one was if someone proposed a new community to be part of the biosphere and the review committee would say, okay, we'll do that, we would find someone who would actually, do this. Oh no, wrong button. There you go. Okay, so we would find someone who would actually lead the community 100% of their time. It would be their full-time job, and we would then pay the guy, the business unit rather, for this guy. We'd basically buy him out, so that all he would do in the following is lead this community. That was his 100% job. It was actually my job too, and was awesome. And yeah, that was the one thing. The other thing is, of course, we have to get contributors, and we can't finance everyone for 100%. That's way above the budget that we had at the time. So what we did is we financed the activity of some of the developers for 10, 20, sometimes 50%, and then they could work in a, so to speak, in a larger orbit, and also could spend some time of their work in the biosphere. The most important thing is not so much the money that we paid here, but rather that we set up a formal contracting. That was most of the times the thing that convinced managers to sign off on the thing. And then also we had cases where people said, you know, you can say no to me going in there, but then I'll find another business unit who says yes. That happened quite a few times. So, and then basically the way we set this up, that everything that was developed in the biosphere could be used by anyone for products or internally for tools, stuff like that. And this piece of software had a license attached, which regulated like what the company can do with it. It protected the developers who developed the thing. A bit boring, but it was helpful in getting the whole thing going. This was also possible, that someone from this business unit worked on something that another business unit profited from, and that was obviously a much tougher sell. Yeah, but that's pretty much the setup that we had, and it worked pretty well. Yes. So over time we had the first 3 years, 300 developers, 15 business units, 11 countries, so it was, as you see, restricted, not really all that much compared to the rest of the company. So what do we work on? The usual, I would say, what you would expect from any open source company, project. So APIs, libraries, tools, we had that very often, sometimes even new products, which were the most interesting, I think. And we had from throwaway prototypes developed in a week, shown to management, like it, no, okay, then we throw it away. And also stuff that runs in our production plants, which really has to work, otherwise the production will stop, which is a big deal for any manufacturing company. So we had a huge range of things that we developed in BIOS. Here are some examples. This is my favorite one. So someone took one of the sensors right here that are in front of cars that are used to regulate the distance, like automated cruise control, mounted it on a tram, and it implemented a collision avoidance system. So it would initiate an emergency brake if the system saw something on the tracks. It's now being rolled out in Frankfurt. That was never a business before for Bosch. Totally between any silo that we had before. Awesome. This one here, we developed a remote control, basically the first IoT-enabled device for the heating system division in 1.5 years from idea to market launch, which is really fast for Bosch standards. with only 3 guys. Tools for engineers, obviously, since this is our biggest business, stuff that goes in the cars, most of it under the hood, so you will never know that you have Bosch in your cars. You probably have. But we built demonstrators showing what these ECUs and sensors and actuators, what they do for you, basically, for customer presentations. And even stuff that was never really known. Like this was, for instance, a demonstration of remote parking on the IAA in Germany, the biggest automotive fair. And our software was running in the trunk, doing all the communication, and yeah, no one even noticed. And also more forward-looking stuff, AR, VR, and so on. So the first 3 years were really a blast, I have to say. And then, I mean, we had so many things that were obviously a success, so that we got an extension. And everyone thought, hey, this is really cool. Let's do this some more. And we got 3 more years of funding. No questions asked, basically, which is really an exception, I guess. So no changes there, really, except for that we had another stewardship. Before it was corporate research, then it was corporate engineering. And then there's a phase 3 where we basically try to expand the whole thing and now make it available for everyone at Bosch. So we have a new BIOS setup, which is a euphemism for saying that we got rid of a lot of really good and useful stuff, unfortunately. So no more review committee, too bad, because the experiment was basically concluded. Way less money, bordering on no money, and also way less time for facilitation, because no funding. It's as easy as that. In the beginning we had corporate funding, which is very cushy, of course, because basically you don't have to ask 20 business units, can you give me like $1 million, can you give me $1 million, so on. We just had one pot of money and it was totally easy. And not so much anymore, and now we have business unit funding, so we have to beg a lot. I guess we call it crowdfunding now. Also the community leader that we once had, the 100% funded community leader, no more, unfortunately. And on the bright side, everyone can start a BIOS project now. You don't need to ask permission, you can just do it like you would on GitHub. So, no more protective layer. Let's see what's going to happen in the next couple of years. I'm curious myself. It's a bit of a gray zone at the moment, I would say. So when we knew that the funding was going away, then some of the community leaders, which at that time couldn't really imagine working any other way, or going back to the usual way, we started a petition. We just put up a wiki page and said, no, this is how we want to work, and this is what we want to do. If you like that and support that, put your name under it. And we ended up getting almost 700 people all over Bosch saying, yes, yes, please, let's do that. And maybe that was one of the reasons that we finally got funding for the next level, which we now call social coding. We probably shot ourselves in the foot by adding another brand for something that's probably similar and got a lot of people confused, but anyway, that's how we call it now. And you know, these were the guys who were doing it. And what we do basically is 3 things. The first one is we try to drive the cultural change forward at Bosch, which is difficult, not just because it's Bosch, because it's always difficult, I guess. Second one is we wanted to provide a platform for coders, which we did not have at the time. So say 2 Bosch people met at a conference somewhere and they had this idea for a new product. They had no platform to collaborate on. They couldn't do it on GitHub because regulations and stuff. So that's one other thing we did, and we wanted to help projects and people using the stuff, applying InnerSource. So some vanity metrics, I like to say. Sorry. What's that? Oh, we did actually. Oh, no worries. Anyway, well, this is now available for all 400,000 associates at Bosch, so quite a huge crowd who can get access to that. And the growth in the last 23 months is, we started with 900 users, now we have 7,000, and it's growing by 100 to 200 per week. In the beginning, 40 projects, now 550, and the repositories kind of exploded. And it's mostly not personal repositories, it's really repositories where people work on. And also the number of users is not really the, people who just logged in once. There's really people who work there, so it's not. This is not a vanity metric. 28 countries, more than 150 business units. Imagine that. I think at Bosch we have 450 legal entities. Yeah, and then this org support. So a lot of things that we did not have on our radar when we started the whole thing. Well, first of all, funding. That was kind of obvious, but still a hassle. We had a tool standard department. We had one tool policy. Not sure if that's common, but we wanted to establish another tool, so some haggling there. Legal, obviously. If you distribute software in from one legal entity to another, usually you have to scan it for open source every commit, which is totally impractical, so we had to find a solution there. Export control, again, because people in the US, stuff can be used in any other country. Works Council, probably something very German, and even the tax authorities. This is the biggest problem to date still, because you have to avoid, and I don't know the English term for it, people, you know, developing software for free in one country, and another country is making all the money. So then the one state would lose the tax income. That's what, of course, the state does not look lightly upon. So we had to find a compromise there. In terms of cultural change, this is where we want to go, and we're closer to that than before, but not there at all. Still a long way to go, after 8 years, mind you. Okay, so what have we learned along the way? Let's start with the good. So the bubble here, it really worked. I was totally amazed to me. So these values we were able to put into practice and even crank the value dial to the max. It was fantastic. I mean, when I came in and my division head approached me and said, "Hey Georg, you want to do this?" I thought, if they can deliver on only half of their promises, it's still going to be awesome. And boy, did they deliver. It was fantastic. That's how we felt like. It was like explorers, like pirates, because we're basically not looking at all the regulations that we had in place. Otherwise, it was awesome. I would say actually in my 30-year career of developing software, those have been the best years by far. I can only recommend it. Also, the productivity we saw in many cases went through the roof. I mean, less processes, less regulations. People just did what they thought was right. They did it because they were motivated to do it. It made all the difference in the world. Some people who would not have been recognized by the organization as talents, we were able to promote using this because they got more publicity. And some of them actually stayed in the company only because they were able to work within BIOS. And that's the question we got very often. Well, how do you make sure that what you do is actually good for Bosch? It aligns with business somehow. And that came totally naturally. Because the number one reward that someone working in BIOS would get is if their software was used somewhere, in a product, in a tool, was useful for someone. So that was never a problem at all. Interesting, as we've seen before with the tram example, we were working outside of the existing silos. Sometimes new things popped up that would never have popped up if we didn't have that freedom that we had. And we always had Bosch business on focus. So it's not only happy engineering, it's really people trying to make a difference at Bosch. Yeah, and that really happened. That wasn't normal before, and now we see it very, it's a common thing now, basically. That problem is solved, I would say. Increased learning, people told me, hey, I've never learned so much in so little time in this little project, participating in pull requests and all that, compared to the traditional trainings that we have. Much faster learning. So one of the success factors, why did we experience that? The first one is, I think, starting as an experiment is a really, really good idea. It was not my idea, but I think it was really smart because it made it very easy for managers to sign off on this, because it was otherwise completely different from how the rest of the company operated. That's good. The facilitation that we had here, especially this guy, he took it upon himself to do all the cores, the accounting, assigning money, doing all the contracts, buying stuff, procurement, that we developers didn't have to worry about. That was a big factor. So he was doing all the work that no one else wanted to do. Important to have such a guy. The 100% community leader was really important because we saw as soon as that went away, the productivity went down. Anyone with community management experience will tell you that. Also, I like, and I probably think it's helpful that the whole thing was bottom-up driven. It was not mandated by management. It was always carried by the developers to this day, and then helped us gain traction, I think. Also, if you look at these two here, if you imagine we only had developers who came because they wanted to, and they were able to share everything they did with everyone else, be completely transparent, that was a natural filter to begin with. So we got only the good guys to begin with. That was excellent, of course. But the main difference, I think, was the fact that we had extraordinarily motivated people. I've never worked with such a motivated crowd before in my life. And there's one guy who actually summarized it very well, what it takes to be motivated. And 3 things. Number 1 is purpose. Maybe you've heard this before. Has anyone seen this live, by the way? Yeah. These guys, they slaved away on this and made it happen because they did have a purpose, a very simple purpose. Colonize Mars, make our species interplanetary. That's some purpose. And look what it got them. And of course, this is the icing on the cake. I was actually sitting in the car and crying and cheering. It was amazing when this thing happened. Anyway, that's purpose. I mean, if that's there, that's already half the motivation, I would say. The second one is autonomy. Like being able to do the stuff the way that you think is the right way, not being dictated everything by processes and regulations. And we totally had that autonomy. And lastly, mastery. Don't force anyone to deliver half-assed stuff because someone defined a deadline half a year ago, which probably didn't make sense to begin with. Let the people get better at what they do. Do things again and again until it's really good. And also we had that freedom to do this. And these three things we had, and that made all the difference, I think. So in summary, we had the right stuff, to quote that movie, if someone remembers that. So the right people, and we had the right setting. That made it so successful. Also, we did some outside-in marketing. We went to where we discovered the InnerSource Commons. We did talks, and sometimes that was the first time some people at Bosch heard of us. Yeah, that's oh, you know that problem. So it was outside-in marketing, but it's really, really important and helped us a lot. And sometimes it was sheer luck, being able to react quickly if an opportunity presented itself, not having to ask anyone for permission or for funds or anything. We could just do it. That often made all the difference. So much for the good parts. There were some challenges, obviously, and that's related to what I just talked about, sufficient internal publicity. We are all developers, we're not marketeers, and I think looking back, I think we did a kind of a lousy job marketing that internally. We thought we were doing great, but after 6 years, almost no one knew us. So that was definitely not enough. Also, we had cultural differences, obviously. They didn't disappear overnight. It was still there, and we noticed it every time we wanted to get someone in the biosphere or a product left the biosphere. That's when the problem's starting to rise. I'm not going to go into details, but those didn't go away overnight. Management buy-in on all levels. Middle management, of course, biggest problem to date. We still haven't convinced everyone. That's a huge barrier to success. And especially this year, getting contributors despite silo thinking, which is still there. And usually everyone's 100% planned for, so anything that they're doing on top is working more than they actually should. Also, and this is going into the metrics department now, quantifying the value contribution that we're making. If you ask me, the most important value contribution that we're making is learning, accelerate learning, having people, good developers, stay in the company because it's really fun working this way. But those are almost immeasurable. I don't know how to put a number on that, but these are the most important value contributions. I kind of skip that. This is what I like best. I like working on APIs. That's my pet peeve. But this is really hard to sell in the company. So, like, I developed an API, then someone built a tool using that API that was used in engineering. Sometime built a product, then it was produced, and then that made money. So you can see how far removed I was from where the money was made, and that's really hard to sell. This one's much easier. If you build something that's used in production and saves money, easier sell. And the best sell, of course, was when you build a new product. Then you know that's new euros, so to speak. But selling the thing is really hard, putting a number on it. Also, after 6 years, people started calling their projects BIOS, even though they were not following all the, putting the values in place, so to speak. So we had a little bit of a brand dilution going on here. And of course, funding, the eternal topic. It's really wearing us down at the moment. And again, this is still a challenge. So looking back, what I would do, or forward rather, what I would do differently if I would start a new InnerSource initiative. First of all, make sure that you have someone in the top level management who really gets InnerSource, who doesn't just do it because someone told him to, but who really understands it and champions it in the organization. Also, and that sounds kind of obvious, it wasn't to us when we started, all software developers, you have to create a business case. You have to somehow put some numbers on what is this worth to the company. And I don't know, it was totally not obvious to us in the beginning. Also, do metrics. I know. I'm a bit of a metrics hater, I admit. I've done it professionally before and I've seen it go bad so often. But still, I mean, we should have done it. I can only recommend to do it. Also, get professional support for outreach. I mean, real professionals like marketing people. I mean, again, not obvious to us in the beginning. We totally messed up there, I guess. Also, we have to do way more what I think Denise calls the dog and pony show. Like, go around the company, like, advertise what you're doing, be there on every event, and just do the dog and pony show. I actually talked to one of the other change initiatives that we had, and they were on 31 events per year. Every year, just doing the same thing all over again, explaining what they were doing, and we were on like 5, maybe 4. It was totally not enough. And also, if you do cultural change, if that's your main topic, and for us it is at this point, because platform is there, people are using it, what's missing now is the cultural change. Don't expect that you get money for that. I heard that from many other change initiatives in my company. You don't get sustained funding because you can't put a number on this. So expect not to have money. And the solution is, in my opinion, network with other change initiatives. In big companies, there are usually many things like agile, working out loud, and what have you. Network with these guys, use the same opportunities, be there on the same events, and plan for early decentralization. We started as a team basically, and we assumed that we would have money for the coming years basically until 2021 was the plan. Totally didn't work out. We should have decentralized way earlier and make sure that there is a community around this thing. Would also take some of the tasks that we did on their own. So are we there yet? A long question. So you know this technology adoption lifecycle model. At the beginning we have the innovators, check. The early adopters, yeah, we definitely had those. Then we have the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. And then there's the chasm here. And after 8 years, I would say we're still here, which is a bit frustrating. There are some business units which definitely crossed over here, but the majority isn't really. And that was 8 years. Maybe we've done it bad. Overall, I don't think so, but it really takes time if you want this to sustain this in your company. But it's still awesome. I hope you get to do it too. It was the best years of my life and of my professional life. Well, I hope that works for you as well. And that's it. How am I doing for time? Oh, excellent. Are there? We have an interview to a really interesting question. We had some original speakers before. Okay, so questions, anyone? How do your developer communicate? Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's recording, no problem.
Okay. Waiting to hear myself louder. Oh, good. So yeah, how do the developer communicate with each other? I mean, where do discussion take place? Because you mentioned decentralized, spread for the world and everything. So how do they communicate with each other, and how do they discover projects to maybe work on?
So the communication part is an easy answer. We have a social network in the company. I think it might actually be the biggest social network anywhere in the world. It's like 400,000 people on one instance of IBM connections, I think. It's not the most beautiful tool, but it scales and it works. That's how we communicate. That's one answer of the communication. And the other one is in forums, in that platform, in Jira, in our issue tracker, and most importantly in pull requests. That's the way we communicate usually. It's, I think, a really excellent way to get new contributors on board when they make their first contribution, to get them on board and say, hey, excellent, you did this, and we have some suggestions, and maybe you do this to make it even better, and hey, super that you're joining us. So getting people on board, that was a really useful medium. As for discovering software, that's a different topic. We started out in the platform with only open projects that everyone could use, BIOS projects. And we decided at some point that we will also allow closed projects, which are not visible to everyone, hoping that they would see the light and at some point convert to BIOS projects. At this time, we have something like an 80-20 split between 20% BIOS and 80% closed. And discovering BIOS projects is actually a challenge. Our plan for this year is to build something like opensource.google.com internally, so where all BIOS projects can self-market themselves. We're going to build a crawler which finds the BIOS projects in the platform, publishes them there, and then we give developers a platform to market. That's what we use for discoverability. But that's still in the making.
And what about search?
What's that?
Search engine?
Yeah, there's search built in and Bitbucket. We're using Bitbucket. It works reasonably well, I would say. Yeah, I know. It's not the same as Google. So I think there's Elasticsearch behind it. You can search for code and you'll find something, but you can also search for repositories. I'm not sure if you can search for developers. I don't think so. Anyway, so I'm not sure how many people actually use that. I personally, I don't use it at all. Unless, I mean, the list of projects, 500, when I know what the project name is, I type the name in there and then I see it right away. But yeah, discoverability is a challenge. Was that the marketing pitch from GitHub, or? Okay, any more questions?
Any questions?
There's one.
Okay, first of all, interesting presentation for sure.
Thank you.
So my question is about people that were joining the biosphere. Could you try to generalize the typical profile of people wanted that were like willing to join this in terms of like age, gender, or background, experience, or?
Okay. I don't think. Well, we did have some women, but the typical profile was actually young to middle-aged white male. That's because that's how the company, this is company demographic, I think. So mostly it was young people. We had very few people who were like above 50, I would say. Even above 40 was probably the minority, I would say. Usually it was developers who already had a good standing within the organization, who could go to their boss and say, hey, I want to do this, and then usually they would get a yes. But we also had really like young developers who did not have the standing and just wanted to work on something cool, so to speak. That was often the reason. But uniformly, I would say people who actually wanted to make a difference and were very motivated about the whole thing were behind the InnerSource. That was definitely a thing. We didn't get I don't think it's a representative part of the demographic that we have in the company. We got the good guys, the early guys basically, the innovators and the techies.